Today, card fighters, we have an exciting deck profile to approach as I'll be showing you my updated variation of Pining Flower Maiden Claudine for the current meta of Cardfight, Vanguard, Divine Z. Now, Claudine has received some very powerful generic support for the plant token archetype, being a plant token rush deck that focuses on using plant tokens as the basis of your 4 attack plays, rushing in the early game. This deck is a pure example of a full powered plant token rush deck, and with all of this new support, I'm excited to showcase to you guys how strong this deck is now. And I'm super excited to finally get into it, but before I can do that, you guys already know what's coming. If you enjoy seeing content like this, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Do not forget to hit that notification bell so you guys are always up to date on my newest videos coming out. Alright you guys, to get this deck profile started off with, I am still playing the Zorga Ride line for Claudine. I still think that the Zorga Ride line is the best one for Claudine. This deck needs help with its card advantage, and the Zorga Ride line still provides that. The draw from going seconds, the Rancor Chain draw 2, the back with Tear Husk Dragon, it improves this deck's resources while being able to keep up the power from the other cards, which they will naturally do, and this being one of the few ways to generate actual draw power in the deck is fantastic. While we have a lot of ways of searching out key pieces now and getting access to those through the deck and compressing for more, I do think that it is important to have access to that early game advantage over the additional push that you get from the Aurora Ride line. I will say though that it does come down to the player, but from my experience with this deck, especially in the current meta right now, being able to draw more cards and guard in the early game is much more important than getting the extra rush with Aurora and the additional plant tokens. 3 copies of the leading lady herself, Pining Flower Maiden Claudine. I do think that there is a conversation we have about Claudine. Claudine is still a very powerful Vanguard that doesn't go away. The card does a lot, giving power to your plant tokens, getting +1 drive, getting 4 attacks, and being essentially completely free outside of a Soul Blast is still huge. This deck has a lot of flexibility to it, and there's a lot of routes it can go depending on if you want to completely focus on token rushing in the early game, or if you want more of like a tempo beatdown strategy with this deck. There's different routes of going. I was able to find a build that was able to mesh both of these strategies together pretty consistently, and it's been the strongest variation of the deck that I've enjoyed so far. I do think that in the future there are a couple of maybe techs you can put into the deck because the order slots in this deck are very flexible outside of like 2 that I think are actually mandatory for Claudine. But outside of that, I do think that this is a pretty rogue Vanguard. I think that she can sneak up on your opponents and steal a couple of games. She plays really well against a lot of the other lower tier decks right now because of how fast she is, and a lot of people just don't know what she does, so they're not prepared to deal with like 30k, 25k, 40k in the early game from a deck like this that uses plant tokens and triggers to push hard in the early game versus a lot of decks that now are doing build-up strategies towards later game to be more effective. For my next card, and a brand new MVP piece that I did not know about, I am now playing 4 copies of Shadowcloak. Shadowcloak is surprisingly an extremely important piece for Claudine moving forward. This card is an order miller as well as a token generator. Now you guys might be wondering, why does this matter? It matters because this 1 card Shadowcloak sets up our power bonus effect with Claudine for our token, which is really important to make sure that the token later on, as its attack patterns continues to grow on power to match the defensive power of your opponent, as well as the fact that it compresses the deck for more chance of drawing into triggers, and it can create you tokens. Claudine's ability lets you bind an order from your drop zone, call out 2 plant tokens, call out Shadowcloak, use its effect, mill an order, use Claudine. That's 3 bodies on board already. Prior to using any of your other effects to reset your board for Claudine's, attacking turn, Shadowcloak is a 1 card starter piece for this deck, while also compressing, getting out the orders in the deck that you have no intentions of using within that moment to acquire more of power for your plant tokens. It's actually a really fantastic card, and it's also free in this deck, and we love free cards, which means that we now have a free unit that does 2 to 3 important key things for this deck: compression, board building, as well as free bodies onto the board for cost and retire. I think what took me so long to get to this is the fact that I haven't seen other people play it. I've noticed it in a lot of other Japanese decks, and it's kind of where I got inspired for it when I hopped back into Claudine and was playing for it. But I knew that the one thing that this deck really needed to be good, especially in the current format, is speed. Claudine has to be a lot faster because swinging 25, 28k with your tokens moving forward just isn't good enough. Like a lot of decks right now, they draw too many cards, they build up way too decent amount of boards to where they can even use their pieces defensively speaking. And the power of a lot of other Vanguards is just at a higher ceiling than what Claudine is. So you really want to dominate the early game or find any way of being able to speed your deck up to match the current meta. And Shadowcloak was a piece that I got from a Japanese list, and I read it and I sat there and I thought about it and I play tested and I was like, oh my god, this card is broken for this deck. For my next card, I am playing 4 copies of the Sea Rumble Brave Shooter. This is an additional card advantage piece. Claudine does not use up a lot of counterblast in this deck, so since we don't have any way of utilizing our energy outside of one other card, and our CB doesn't really go to too many other cards, I figured why not just play this. The deck does need a boost in card advantage, and this card is automatically great for that, you know, riding up defending. It is an energy cycler, and I think at this point we all know what this does and how fantastic it can be. The Persona Ride skill actually does matter sometimes, because when Claudine does start falling off a bit when it's too late in the game, because the ceiling of power from the planet tokens is different than what other cards can do, then this card actually does come up for that. But outside of that, we just use this card as additional piece to keep drawing and filtering out our deck for other key cards we want in the early game or in the later game as the match goes into a grindier game. For my next card, I am playing 1 copy of Prod Pollen Raphelius. This is just a generic plant token generator. If you draw into it and see it, it gets automatically thrown on the board and give you 2 plant tokens. The reason why I'm playing this over the grade 1 variation of it is because the intercept. That's literally it. I just value the intercept more, and it's 1k more power. And then the amount of times I will eventually see this card via my orders or the effects of my other cards, Superior Call Out, will be fine for me. But I just value additional 5k shield. Believe it or not, it does come up sometimes. You want to intercept versus just playing the grade 1 variation that can't do anything, because again, this deck does not build up a huge hand. So you still want to take advantage of your board to protect yourself, even with cards like these. But it's just a 2-card plant token generator that's a body that we can use to protect ourselves and has a better number than the grade 1 variation. For my next card, it is 1 copy of Atrocious Moth Girl Maple. I think in this deck, Maple still has a role, especially as a 1-of, because it does matter. Maple, when you Persona Ride, will become additional body onto the board outside of Claudine creating 2 plant tokens. So if you see this card, you still get the 3 bodies on board needed to activate your Vanguard's effect. And again, Claudine does not build up the best card advantage, despite the triple drive, the rumble, the ride line, all those things help, but in the grindier game or the later games where a lot of decks can't survive into, it doesn't build up a huge hand. So at that point, you want to start utilizing as many resources that you can. Persona Riding and getting this card as a free body on the board is actually really huge and does save you sometimes, because instead of committing cards from your hand to get that Retire 3 effect and access all of her good abilities, you can use her order effect and then your Atrocious Moth Girl Maple as cost to immediately set up for that. I also wanted to add that if you did not want to play the Raphelius here, you can give this card up to play the grade 3 that revives itself from drops when you ride up to grade 3. That card's good too. They all serve the same purpose of just getting bodies onto the board to set up for Claudine's Retire, and then you have the pieces you actually care about on the field after you've done the Retire cost and effect. But this is just essentially a free body that we can use in the later game to make sure that we can consistently use Claudine's Retire 3 cost every single turn without it being a detriment to our hand in the future games. For my next card, 3 Sentinels and 1 Elementaria. For my next card, 4 copies of Burrow Mushrooms. The MVP of any plant token rush deck, Burrow Mushrooms give you soul, 2 plant tokens onto the board. It's just an insanely free card in this deck and can help you set up for Claudine's Retire or her board afterwards. Next up, 2 copies of Amicable Maiden Alvinia. One of the more powerful generic Stoichia pieces, Alvinia is insane in this deck. She really is. Being able to get access to one of our orders or one of our key grade 1 pieces like our mushrooms or another grade 1 piece that I'm about to showcase in the future is extremely impactful. But mainly getting the mushrooms. Using this and mushrooms as 3 bodies onto the board for the Retire or more bodies onto the board to set up with your offense. But it's a great way of having access to everything that we've thrown away from our Shadowcloaks or anything that we've used or we soul blasted out via Claudine's effect or other card effects to get us the key pieces we need during any time period of the game. And it doesn't conflict with Sea Rumble Brave Shooter in this deck because our CB goes to Rumble Brave Shooter outside of the times that we can use energy for both cards, because naturally energy is a resource that doesn't go anywhere outside of Rumble and this card here. But it's a fantastic resource piece as well as offensive piece when setting up your board, getting back your orders, or being set up as the cost and Retire for your Claudine. And another new very important card for this deck, and honestly the only reason why Claudine is even being able to be talked about today, I have to give it up to something I love in both real time and the game itself. 4 copies of Fanatic Garlic. This card is insane. Now, to go over it real quickly, Fanatic Garlic has two very simple effects. The first one states that during the battle it boosts a plant token, it gets 5k for each of your plant tokens onto the board. And then the back row skill is when your plant token stands in the same column as it, you get to stand itself. Now you might be wondering, why is this such a big deal for this deck? This is a huge deal for Claudine. First of all, if you played Claudine before, you know that you can only use the plant token for the restanding effect, right? That means that Garlic, with its ability, will automatically become a 13k booster. Combine that with the effect of your other units, you should have at least 2 to 3 plant tokens onto the board minimum, always. So your Fanatic Garlic is going to be a consistent 18 or 23k booster against your opponent every single time. This fixes the key issue that the deck had prior, which was power. This card alone takes care of that problem. So now you can invest other pieces into your deck, which was fantastic when I found out about this card, to fix your consistency as well as your card advantage issues that we had in prior Claudine iterations. Garlic fixes the power problem. It gives you access to a stronger early game rush. It makes insane numbers at any time period in the game because it's not restricted by anything, and it doesn't have a cost. Claudine, once again, has received another powerful generic unit that does not have a cost attached to it, really helping this deck out. Not having a cost attached to all of these skills that are very powerful for this deck in particular is huge, because eventually you're going to get something in Stoicheia that has a high cost to it that we're going to want to use consistently, and we'll be able to incorporate that into this deck to make it a lot stronger in the future. But Fanatic Garlic has been one of the best beat stick pieces this deck could ask for, fixing your numbers, making sure that your attack patterns are consistently good during any time period of the game, whether your opponent builds defensive or not, is huge for this deck. It makes the grind games a lot easier, because in previous variations, or when I played into grindier matchups with Claudine, power was something that I had to worry about. I had to dig for my orders from my hand. I had to hopefully draw into more orders to throw away or get blitz orders going. I don't have to worry about that anymore. Garlic just fixes that problem on its own, and then Claudine, other card effects, will add more power to our plant tokens to make sure that as the game goes on, this deck just gets stronger and stronger, and our plant tokens stay consistently powerful no matter what's going on. Now, for the orders of this deck, I've tried to keep it nice and simple and just play the strongest ones I think Stoicheia has to improve this deck's consistency or card advantage. So 1 copy of Mythiarch Habitat, one of the strongest Stoicheia orders ever. Check top 7, and then being able to call something is huge in this deck, and all of our best cards are grade 1 or lower anyway, so this being able to be used right off the get-go is huge. 1 copy of In the Dim Darkness of Frozen Resentment, simply because if you have Burrow Mushrooms, you can do that Burrow Mushrooms play. We get to mill out cards from your deck, and then you get to call Burrow Mushrooms out, reset it. But this card becomes relevant in the later game when there are key pieces I need to get back onto the board, and I still need to compress my deck to increase my chance of seeing triggers. 1 copy of Nectar of Sensationalism. Now, this is like one of the free order slots in the deck that I have for it. I think that Nectar of Sensationalism, from my experience, comes up every once in a while when the game has gone on too long, or I burn through so many pieces that I have the resources needed to actually make it work. When this card does activate and you do get that plant token with like 63k power and double crit, it's huge. It's a big deal. It does come up. So I will say that it has deserved its slot, but it's definitely not like an order that if I lost out on, it's the end of the world. I think the new grade 1 order that just came out for Stoicheia that gives 5k to one of your units per every other 5k unit is huge, but then again, you can't deny getting a free crit, right? Now, my Regalias piece for the deck is Gradius Grottle. I know that there's a bunch of other Regalias pieces you can play. Bracing Angel Ladder is something that I've considered, considering the fact that the new Gandiva is out, so that's something I might go back to. That's an option. Radiance Caliburn is always good, but I only felt like those 3 were relevant for this deck, and none of the other ones really mattered. I like Gradius Grottle because persona writing in this deck is huge. It's one of the few ways you get to maintain consistent power and then draw cards, and I felt like it was more important than the other 2. I mean, obviously, depending on where the meta goes, I will naturally change out my Regalias piece to fit it, but I think that Gradius Grottle, Radiance Caliburn, or Bracing Angel Ladder, those are the 3 Regalias pieces that I would play for this deck to make sure that it still gets you a card, but can cover a weakness that you're more worried about the deck depending on your playstyle. And for my final order, I am playing 3 copies of Blessings to the Flowering Bud. Now, there's a lot of Claudine decks that build their entire strategy revolving around this card. I am now at the point with playing this deck and with seeing how the support has worked so far, where if I draw into this card and with the cards that I have in this deck, it's just nice to have. I think that building your entire strategy around this card is no longer viable. I think that unless your deck was able to play 12 crits, which we cannot do in standard format, it might have been worth it, but it's no longer worth it to me. I think that if you draw this card, it's nice to see it, but your deck has other issues that we need to work on to mitigate through with the other orders, with other card effects, so it's no longer viable to have this be the focal point of your strategy. Just play Claudine as a fast aggro beatdown deck that can hopefully defeat your opponent on the first Persona Ride turn with triggers and effects and the power of the plant tokens and you rushing hard in the early game. This card and Mythiarch Habitat are the two mandatory orders I think this deck needs. This is way too much free advantage, and this is how you generate your high, insane plant token numbers for any time period of the game because it is a grade 0 order. These two cards make up the deck and make them really strong. The other three can be whatever you want them to be, and I already discussed the Regali's pieces, but while you're picking out your orders, just make sure you have these. In terms of ratios, you play whatever you think is best for you. For my trigger lineup, I had to keep it very nice and simple, no experimenting. 4 effect crits, 4 normal crits. I'm playing a total of 3 draws, 1 copy of the Stoicheia OT, and then 4 generic heals. The Stoicheia OT is still very strong, especially in this deck, because it gives you all the advantage you'd be missing if you activate it offensively. Draw triggers to make up for the deck's lack of card advantage. 8 crits because you are trying to finish your games as soon as possible. This is not a deck that wants to play into the grind game. And then 4 generic heals because I don't feel like playing with my defense. I'm very well aware of what the meta is and my chances of seeing certain things, but I'd rather just draw into a guaranteed 15k shield, especially with a deck like this, than draw into a 10k shield and hoping I can get it to work. Pining Flower Maiden Claudine is one of the most fun rogue decks I've played in a while. This deck has been really catching a lot of people off guard. I played against some very high-powered decks in the current format, and this deck is doing very well against them. While it's not top tier by any means necessary, it does have the capacity to out-advantage these decks in the early game with its high power, with its consistency, being able to make a free board from plant tokens. It can definitely put up a fight if it dominates very well in the early game, and then with luck as well as experience in the later games, you should be able to find some success. I definitely do think that there's still like a piece or two missing to make this deck like competitively viable. The card advantage is still pretty weak. I've discussed that multiple times, and by putting in certain cards try to mitigate that issue, but defensively speaking, the deck's not the best. It is a pure Stoicheia aggro deck. It has the problems that any aggro deck has in terms of card advantage when you're playing this aggressively, but with proper maintenance as well as understanding the meta, you should have done at least very well with this deck, or at least have a good time playing against anything that's currently out there right now. Prison still sucks to play against, but I think nobody likes playing against Prison, so outside of that, that's one of the key matchups that really does suck for this deck. But I've been having a good time with Claudine, so hopefully you guys take this deck profile, learn something from it, and incorporate it to your own Claudine decks, and then give me some feedback on what you guys think I can improve on, or hey, guys like the deck so far, and let's get a discussion going there. But with that being said, card fighters, thank you so much for joining me throughout today's deck profile. I will catch you later. Peace.